Hey everyone, this is Barkha Dutt. You're with the Mojo Story, the platform that brings you some of the most interesting voices from all across the world. And today we're going to be talking to the author of a fascinating new book, one that has unprecedented access to the spy agencies of India and Pakistan, making several explosive revelations with its insider access to both the RAW and the ISI. Let's bring up our main focus on the program today. We are going to be talking to one of two journalists who actually ended up being a functional back channel between India and Pakistan. I'm talking about Adrian Levy and Cathy Scott-Clark. Their absolutely groundbreaking new book is called Spy Stories Inside the Secret World of the RAW and the ISI. And they really do have extraordinary access both to people on record and, of course, off record, to people whose identities have had to be protected. The book quotes NSA Ajit Doval as calling the ISI a forever enemy, giving his assent to this project, saying no detail about the ISI is too small for India to be cognizant of. Finally, the book reveals that this back channel, in the form of these two journalists, the authors of this book, was functional even after the Pulwama attacks and before the Balakot strikes. This is only some of, as I said, the absolutely fascinating and riveting revelations that have been made in this book. Let's welcome now to the program Adrian Levy, the author of this book, also one half of that fascinating back channel. Adrian, what a book. Congratulations. I always am kind of fascinated by how you guys get the kind of access that you do. And this book seems to have had like the blessings of both the ISI and the RAW, and what like Prime Minister after Prime Minister have not managed to get the ISI and the RAW on the same page about something, which is this book. You and Cathy managed to do this. What the book doesn't tell us is how long did it take you to persuade, men and women on either side to talk to you, and what kind of tipped the decision, especially for those who are still in government, to give you a go-ahead for this project. And I do want to ask you about how you guys played the back channel moment, but first about the book itself.
Well, the first thing to say is, as you've said in your intro, there's two of us, and Cathy is an extraordinary journalist and long-time partner in all of these ventures, and so it's a great shame that I'm here on my own as the lone man sitting in this room. But I want everyone to know that really there's no one who could do a better research, collation, and contact chasing job than Cathy Scott-Clark, and so this is a homage to Cathy, who's not here. I dispute this word back channel. I kind of think that is like spinning out a vortex here. What this game is about in the last 5-6 years especially is influence. And the war that's being fought right now, as you and I know, and we've talked about this before, is about truth. And the way we perceive truth, leveraging truth, diluting truth with doubt, that is the game in which ISI and RAW excel at. They excel at pumping.
Well, I mean, to be fair, that's their job. To be fair, that's their job.
Hey,
their job
is
smoke and mirrors. Their job is not our job, which is to see the truth beyond the smoke and mirrors.
This is not a criticism. This is just a depiction. I absolutely totally agree with you that all agencies do this. But the difference being that in this in this area, on such a live and hot border, the results can be stunning, and the perception battle, the battle for truth, the battle for influence, extends to a book like this. So we initially wanted to make this as a film, and we went to everybody shortly after a groundbreaking Israeli film came out called Gatekeepers, which is about the secret domestic intelligence service in Israel. And we said to everyone, look at this film. It got these people who have never talked in public to throw a certain narrative on Israel-Palestine. And it extended lots of different kinds of influences. For example, it told a story about how hot power fails, and how all of these men who were quite hawkish, who held these positions, ultimately felt that the agencies failed, and that the need for dialogue, the need for political process was far more important than the need for a covert state. because we fetishize spies and spy agencies and the Bourne Identity kind of things. So we went with this movie. No one wanted to be in the movie. Everyone said, we're spies. We don't want to be on the screen. We don't want anyone to see us. And so we went back with other examples of influential American movies that belittle Indian agencies. I could name you 100 great books, which I personally love, in which India or Pakistan are bit part players or caricatures or tropes. And, they could not be further from the truth, as you and I know.
And one of the fascinating things in the book, I don't want to give away too much, but I'd actually forgotten this, was basically how India successfully makes, nudges the world into thinking that there's a link between Pakistan and 9/11. And after that, Pakistan spends years trying to address that perception and, it doesn't really succeed. So I was like reading that and saying, wow, well done, Raw. But let's just come back. Let's come to your and Cathy's role, which you liken to the time that the CIA and the KGB sort of use this conduit, which you call the Gavrilova moment. And you talk about how even after the Pulwama attack and before the Balakot strikes, this back channel through you and Cathy was open, right? Talk a little bit about this. How did it come to be? And how did you manage this role, this de facto role, as it were?
Well, first of all, whatever anyone says, it's not a back channel. This is just a good job of being the water carrier, And if you're prepared to be the water carrier and you're prepared to go the extra mile, and you're prepared to to see everybody that you can see in any possible setting, then you can become that water carrier. And so it meant that at one stage we could be in Islamabad, we could be in Pindi, and also we could be then in Delhi, and we could cross over the land border when that was allowed and there was no war, or we'd fly through the Gulf and go on a ludicrous 9-10 hour journey to reach the neighbor next door because of warlike conditions. But this is not a back channel. What this is two sides seeking influence, two sides seeking to help cherry pick which scenes are the ones that they feel are pivotal in their stories, in their spy stories. So, for example, we create a narrative. We go to one set of spies in Pakistan, and we talk to analysts, and we talk to internal, external. We talk to special operations. We talk to special services, and we say, what are the scenes that fermented the generations that we're in now?
But could you speak specifically to what happens after the Pulwama attack, which India believes is the work of the Jaish-e-Mohammed, and has always believed so, and Pakistan tries to disassociate itself and tries to thrust this on a kind of local Kashmiri context, and India isn't buying any of that, but they're talking through you and Cathy at that moment. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, one of the things that happened after 2014, when the national security setup got transformed by Ajit Doval, is it creates these silos that sit under the National Security Advisor and under Rajinder Khanna, the Deputy National Security Advisor. And these have different specific functions. But one of the functions of the much more dexterous national security environment is to reach out to people and to persuade them and to talk and to change opinion and to divulge certain amounts of information in order that the narratives around the world may coalesce with the Indian point of view. And the difference is that beforehand, India wouldn't have done it in this way, wouldn't reach out to influence makers, wouldn't reach out to pivotal thinkers, journalists, writers, and politicians in the same way. And post Doval, that is the situation. That is what they were doing. So, for example, what was extraordinary was the number of people inside the national security environment who will reach out and they'll say, how do you see it? What do they say? And we'd say, well, ISI is telling us this. They say, yes, Jaish, but, we are targeting Jaish. Jaish are the enemy of the state. And then RAW would push back. The Defense Intelligence Agency would push back. Military Intelligence Agency would push back. And you have this live debate where people are seeking influence and information to truly understand what's going on. Because the instant hot take is never the truth. You see the devastating pictures of Pulwama, heart-rending photos. They are only one truth. And understanding all the sort of pulleys and levers that go beneath that, that's the job That's the job of a journalist.
Well, yes, but I mean, I think from an Indian perspective, the singular truth is at least this, that there has been a patronage in Pakistan of groups like the Jaish-e-Mohammed. We just showed Masood Azhar, and there is no ambiguity, at least in that truth. And my question to you was going to be, as you know, someone who also profiles Ajit Doval's sort of journey through these cataclysmic events. I was just looking at Masood Azhar and thinking, oh my God, you know, Doval was in the intelligence bureau when IC 814 gets hijacked. Masood Azhar is released. Doval is on that, you know, at that moment trying to secure the safety of those passengers who are on board that plane. And then he becomes National Security Advisor, and he still has to deal with the Jaish-e-Mohammed having fueled the Pulwama attack, and then the Balakot strikes, come in their wake. Your book says Mr. Doval saw IC 814 as a diplomatic failure. Can you explain what you think he meant by that?
Yeah, I mean, there are two or three things wrapped up in all of this. I think, you know, as people get used to this phrase, creation stories, you know, normally we use it now for the Marvel Cinematic Universe. You know, you have these stories that give birth to certain things, and India-Pakistan has a series of events that take place, which are the forge. They're the forge for the bad actors. They're the forge for the Islamists, the political ultra-right wing, the armed factions, the insurgents, the terrorists, and they're a forge for the thief catchers, the thief takers, the police, the intelligence agencies, the spies and their assets. And if you imagine what becomes clear is the same group are chasing the same group of bad actors. And actually, it begins really in the mid-'80s with kidnappings that took place in Delhi, which were kidnappings orchestrated originally by the British jihadi Omar Sheikh, and then a second set of kidnappings in Kashmir, which we wrote about in a book called The Meadow. And then they move the people who get caught in association with that, or the people who the kidnappers wish to free from prison, then become the subject of IC 814 in 1999, which is the second pivotal event. And there they want Masood Azhar released, Omar Sheikh released, and the people doing the hijacking are Masood Azhar's family and a whole host of other people who are part of the small bad family. So, as you point out, among the thief catchers, if you like, is Ajit Doval and others. Syed Asif Ibrahim and other people who become, you know, at the apex of Intelligence Bureau and the RAW. And what they found out with IC 814 is that, you know, I believe that they think that, you know, speedier, hot action should have been taken when it was possible. And that this long, sprawling bureaucracy and sort of failure really to make hard decisions fast led to the protracted touchdown in Kandahar. And as your viewers may remember, the appalling scenes of the Taliban ringing the plane. And then, of course, what happens? Masood Azhar is released, Omar Sheikh is released, and both trigger bloodshed that affects India, Pakistan for 3 decades.
And then today, in literally life-turning full circle, the Taliban is inching towards Kabul, now 95 miles short of Kabul as we speak. Now, here's the question. Kulbhushan Jadhav, that's another sort of big flashpoint. It's an ongoing flashpoint between India and Pakistan, and your book offers a fascinating sort of backstory into how Jadhav actually gets literally lured by the Pakistanis. It's almost like he walks into this sort of trap. And the description of him is that he's an asset, not an officer. That's the exact quote. And that the ISI kind of know that. The ISI, of course, are trying to use Kulbhushan Jadhav to their own advantage as a kind of negotiating chip with us in India. But they know exactly what his worth is. Can you talk a little bit about the Kulbhushan Jadhav story and what you think might happen to him now?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, these are the opinions, the sources that we talk to, but there's a world of difference between what the police want, let's say, and what spies want. So if someone breaks the law, the police want to arrest that person, and they want that person put through the criminal justice system, tried, jailed if necessary, judge and court deciding. What a spy will do is see a situation, and then they see someone committing a criminal act, and then they want to leverage that act to either blackmail that person or to target that person and grow them into something else in an operation that will extend and extend and extend. And so the two desires are very, very different. And ISI definitely was looking at the long ball. And a lot of people we talk to inside ISI talk about how they realized that a man like Yadav is vulnerable. He's vulnerable because he's carrying a multiplicity of IDs. Two, he's carrying false information on the IDs. And the third pivotal thing, he's got a false religion ascribed to those IDs. And when they check the IDs go back to a property in Mumbai, and that property is registered to one person who's married to a senior police officer. So there's no cover provided. Now, there's no point arresting and publicizing the arrest of this man. He's a small fish. And, he's a father, remember, of children. The story here is quite tragic. Instead, they decide to squeeze him. And they put him in a position, they allege, where they can grow him, and they grow him to appear to be a huge espionage agent by suggesting he take hold of some plans for an air base in Pakistan, knowing that if he takes the hands, this minnow becomes a whale, and then suddenly what you've got is a bridge of spies type spy exchange where Pakistan can leverage a man like Yadav. And that is in fact what Pakistan did. They attempted to grow this man. But what does asset mean? And, what does officer mean? It's a really important distinction. If you're an officer, you're trained in a cadre of a spy outfit. You're trained in RAW, ISI, MI6, CIA. And along with that comes a huge amount of practice and institutional backup. But if you're an asset, you're somebody from which they can derive information. And one thing became clear after the debacle and the nightmare of 26/11. There's pressure on all the agencies in India to do better work. And there's reasons for this, which we'll come back to in a second. One of the things they're asked to do is to work harder to recruit assets and sources, but also to place people inside those domains where the bad guys are acting. In this case, Lashkar-e-Toiba, the long-time enemy of everyone, led by Hafiz Saeed, who've moved to Karachi. And so somebody who has access to a hot border between Iran and Pakistan, and also can get down to Karachi, that is a thrilling proposition, as an asset, not as an officer. And here was a man who had the paperwork to enable him to walk. Pakistan watches that and thinks, let's grow this into a scandal.
Yeah. What do you think will happen to him? What do you think will happen to Kulbhushan Jadhav?
Well, I think this really changes with the month. And he is definitely being lined up for a kind of Bridge of Spies style trade when the right price can be met. And unfortunately, these things can lurch tragically in one direction or another. When Afzal Guru was hanged, there was a fear that the same fate might meet Kulbhushan Yadav. So reciprocal relations, will decide the fate of this guy. He is a prize asset, no doubt, but causing discomfort. In spy wars, you're attempting to cause discomfort. Any agency would. And look at the prisoners that are being held right now in Iran and in China. Again, same kind of rules apply.
Speaking of Afzal Guru, one of the big untold stories of our time, unless I think you decide to write a book on it next, is a police officer, or I should say an erstwhile police officer called Devinder Singh. Right now, Devinder Singh, it's just wheels within wheels. And even as somebody who's sort of reported from Jammu and Kashmir for 2 decades, I can't get my head around this. I simply can't. And I want you to talk a little bit about, what you uncovered in the course of your research.
Yeah, I mean, we should say that with Mr. Singh, he's still yet to be convicted.
So I know.
I've just got to put my own legal parenthesis around this. But a very interesting thing has arisen from what we can see from the cases that have been put, the interviews we did with SDF Special Task Force in Kashmir, and with IB and NIA officers who are looking at this case. The first thing to frame in everyone's mind is, what is STF? And Special Operations Group, or Special Task Force, came about in 94-95 with the idea of getting Kashmiris to own their own struggle. And a time when the police Kashmiri police were treated as fourth-class citizens, there became this idea from within the Kashmiri police force and within IB, Intelligence Bureau, to make the Kashmiri to own their own struggle by forming a special unit, which would be a counterinsurgency unit. As those who created the unit told us repeatedly, that unit very rapidly took on some unfortunate characteristics by about 97, 98, whereby it was using the weapons it was capturing and blackmailing a lot of the people who were subject to investigation in order to commit their own crimes to settle scores inside Kashmir. And you had kidnappings, which are well documented, murders, rapes, and thefts, which took place, where individual members of the SDF were responsible. And they became akin, really, to the French Foreign Legion. And that's how we've kind of written it, in that if you were facing the boot in the traditional police force, or you were under the spotlight, where could you go? You could go to the SDF. And the reason for that is that the chances are you might be killed. It's extremely hard service. You're always in counterinsurgency operations. And within that outfit, there are a couple of people, not just Devinder Singh, but also a second officer who played both sides. It appears, according to the allegations made, they played both sides, and that they were at the same time recruiting assets, and they were also working for those assets, it's alleged. And so,
well, it's like David Headley, right? It's like Headley. What was Headley?
Yeah,
I mean, we'll never know what Headley was. We'll never know what Headley was.
And like Headley, you're totally right. These people are pathological, and they're convincing in every setting. When they're talking to their supervisors and the higher ups, they seem to be working for SDF. And yet we know from broader cases with the Rajbir Singh case and with Devinder Singh that they were also working for drug dealers, they were working for weapons traffickers. And on one occasion, the intelligence agencies actually leaked a transcript of one of these SDF officers because they were so concerned that a court case was fermenting around a drug deal that never happened, and that the cop was actually working for the drug syndicate. Now, the reason why this is important, there are bad cops everywhere. Britain is full of them. The reason why it's important in connection with the Parliament attack is it's these two bad cops who are responsible for the relationship with the prime accused and the small group of accused, but also they're the ones who fashion the evidence. And so because a lot of information concerning these bent cops, or allegedly cops who have committed malpractice, is kept from the courts themselves don't get to look at all the material and the evidence. And so what you have is a case that is manufactured that leaves aside the provenance of the key investigating officers. And I think we've charted the bad acts, the bad lieutenants, and how they came about inside the book.
Yeah. And now, let's move to the sort of the other widely known, Devinder Singh. It could be sort of many layers of onion peeling before we get to actually what happened. But anyone who sort of reported on the Burhan Wani elimination and the run up to that period, kind of knew that the agencies had infiltrated that circle. And your book clearly says that that's what happened with Wani, that the Indian security agencies were clearly part of that, the group, the Burhan Wani group, before they shot him. Talk a little bit about the Burhan Wani sort of story and where your research led you.
Sure. I mean, this is one of the really counterintuitive sides, and we should just mention this really briefly. That there yet again is this caricature and trope of Indian security services as sort of, over-coddled, essentially pacifist, last to act, overly bureaucratic, facing down the hot actions of the malevolent ISI. And this is purely fictitious and is not true and does not reflect the true nature of the Indian security forces, who are running full spectrum espionage and are doing it ruthlessly and efficiently in hot actions all around the world, and especially in the region. Now, the Burhan Wani case is just an example of an intelligence grid that was grown. And part of the practice, which has not been well documented, is to observe, eavesdrop, and infiltrate. And these groups could then be infiltrated, puppeteered, and owned. Lashkar-e-Toiba was massively penetrated both in Pakistan and in Kashmir. The same was true with Jaish-e-Mohammed, massively penetrated and puppeteered inside.
But
and
then
when
the problem becomes when you pick up one of them and you say they're with the group, are they one of yours or are they one of theirs?
Well, I mean, there's certainly a massive issue with who instigates. Who is the instigator? And this is something we should talk about. And it's one of Mr. Doval's projects. I feel that after 2014, the narrative certainly becomes skewed as to who instigates. and who actually is the trigger, and whether something is engendered and allowed, or whether actually it happens. But with someone like Burhan Wani, what happens when you talk to the people who are involved is you realise that one set of people think that he's being pursued with a view to capture, and another set, and this touches on what we were just saying with Kulbushan Yadav, have no intention of capturing him. What they want to do is grow him, and so you've got the police instinct, which is capture. Someone breaking the law with weapons, committing potentially terrorist incidents, and the other group is saying grow him. Why would you grow a man like Burhan? Well, he is something unique. He's Kashmiri. He uses social media. He's a handsome young man of Kashmir who is recruiting a huge number of people behind him, or at least creating influence, let's say.
And he's a possible way to ensnare foreign terrorists from countries like Pakistan.
Totally. So what the first thing you see happening is that the massive eavesdropping operation that takes place directly describes him as flypaper, and Burhan will pop up, and then you'll have voices across the line of control, and these voices are like, look at Burhan, what's Burhan doing? And suddenly you give a number to each one of these cells that lights up on the dark map. And you know that you've not seen the outfit New Moon for a while. Al Badr, there's Al Badr. You've not seen a breakaway group from Lashkar-e-Toiba. There's Lashkar-e-Toiba. And because the groups begin to splinter to pursue Burhan Wani, what you have is he's an emulsifying effect, bringing these people out into the net, into the grid, and then of course those people are nearly all killed. I think we trace in the 2-year period. But there's something much more cold-blooded here, and this is the final thing on this, which is that there are operations that ISI have done which have directly attempted to destroy the morale of Indian people. A good example of that is the ISI's involvement in the cricket betting scandal. They deliberately went after sports stars, and it wasn't just to make money; it was to destroy the morale of people who idolise different people in public life. And the same with Burhan Wani. If he is raised to become a kind of handsome folk legend, to bring him down also destroys the morale of the people who were in his wake.
Interesting. In talking about legends, I want to talk about two sort of, quite cult stories or moments, rather, when it comes to both these spy agencies. Yeah. One, of course, is, during the Kargil war, the fact is that the RANW manages to scoop these tapes of secret conversations that point to the fact that it isn't intruders but the Pakistani military that's actually inside Indian territory. So that was one. And the second is how the Indian intelligence basically tips off Pervez Musharraf on his life being at possible risk from the Jaish-e-Mohammed. So these are some of the sort of legends, as it were, that one has almost grown up reporting on. The Musharraf chapter that you write about is fascinating, because you actually suggest that he genuinely did want to, at least for a period of time, to go after the Jaish. And I know that the Vajpayee government at the time also believed that. There were enough Indians who believed, despite what had happened in Kargil, that Musharraf was India's best bet.
That's absolutely right. And there's no doubt, and this is unanimous on both sides, that they came within a whisker of pulling off something really quite remarkable, which I think you could call really a theory of everything. It was a theory of everything deal that could have taken in, shared waters, the LOC, and Kashmir, Sir Creek, lots of other of the bugbears and political hotspots between India, Kashmir, in India and Pakistan, they came very near. And one thing to remember in these instances, and you know this better than most people, is there are spoilers, and it is the role of the religious, ultra-religious, far right-wing chauvinists who are also armed and were the creatures previously of ISI, to destroy these kind of deals. Peace does not suit the business of jihad. Peace does not suit the people who make money from permanent war. And so when India-Pakistan come near, this happened in 1988 with a very near deal that was an attempt by Zia to make a deal with India after the fall of the Soviet Union in Afghanistan. It came with Musharraf also, and in both cases, serious incidents took place which prevented those deals from happening. Of course, in the Musharraf case, it's the disastrous raid, Mumbai 26/11. But both sides can see the benefits of talks. Both sides invest heartily in a back channel, and both sides, both in 1988 and also in 2007, remarkably found deep friendships that went on outside the levels of those talks in terms of exchanges of correspondence and letters. And of course, these things don't get reported, because what gets reported is the necessary psychological spin, which is two nations at war, two nations blaming each other, two nations facing each other down over the line of control. Whereas behind the scenes, in fact, there's this urge up until that point to resolve the issues. After 2008 and the fall of Musharraf, the death of Benazir Bhutto, things change.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, in fact, the book has this really interesting thing where an evaluation of Musharraf and a secret report that evaluates Musharraf lands up on Musharraf's table. And he kind of accepts that while there's support for him in the military, as someone, negotiating with the outside world, he's lost his mojo, as it were, in Pakistan. So
totally,
really fascinating nuggets. I have to close with asking you about the life turning full circle, the Taliban's on the ascent, what you might think that may do to the ISI's sort of great game. The Taliban has long been, part of the Pakistan project, and suddenly their guys are back in influence. And I know that there's concern in India of one section pushing for engagement with the Taliban, the other saying that absolutely upends our position on there are no good terrorists versus bad terrorists. So just your final thoughts on that.
Well, what a disaster, a disaster of American policy. And if you read the Washington Post, you'll see that the Inspector General's reports, which are private comments made by war fighters, intelligence agents and political advisors from 2002 onwards, warns of this and foreshadows this, because of failures in training the police, who were not trusted, an army that's national in a heavily divided, ethnocentric country. I mean, it's a catalogue of disasters in terms of US policy, and what we're seeing now is really soul-destroying. But one lesson here, and we should pull this out of the Pulwama experience directly, is that what the evidence, covert evidence, shows is that the command and control structure for the worst of these outfits, like Jaish-e-Mohammed Masood Azhar's outfit, moved wholesale out of Pakistan and exist in lawless areas. And they benefit from lawlessness and the lack of government. And one of the areas that they've been training in, and they've been learning to use IEDs, explosives, etc., is southern Afghanistan, and particularly the areas around Lashkar and around Khost, the former where the British Army once was. And in these lawless areas, from there, they are using that as a staging post to strike India, but also other places, because the outfits melded with Al-Qaeda and elements of Islamic State and a few foot soldiers from the other rabid groups like Lashkar-e-Jhangvi, who are sectarians, anti-Shia groups, but also remnants of Islamic State, and they can appear anywhere. Recently, intelligence has found them in Turkey, ready to go and re-enter, the fighting that's going on in Syria. And so, anywhere where there is free fall, it did not happen between India and Pakistan post 2611. It is happening in Afghanistan now, and everyone has a right to be scared of what may foment in the lack of law.
And I mean, I remember a time when there was a graveyard, and you would know this in Srinagar, that was just for foreign terrorists. And they used to be terrorists from Afghanistan, from Sudan. And I think there are big questions about whether we are going to see a return to some of those years, and really questions for the world there. But Adrian, I have to leave it there. I just, as we're seeing these pictures out of Afghanistan, I just want to say thank you. I enjoyed the book thoroughly. For our audience, I highly recommend it. Whether you like spy stories, or whether India, Pakistan, Jammu and Kashmir, what goes on behind the scenes is something that interests you, or just as an entertaining read, it is an absolutely fascinating account. Congratulations again, and thank you. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and we'll have you back soon. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much indeed.
Thanks, Adrian. Take care. It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.